So this is the Monday, March 5th roundtable call. We're going to talk about governance stuff, right? RFCs. I'm going to share it here. I'll share my screen for a moment just to show you this weirdness. I was opening, oh wait, it went away. Oh, I was opening this file. This is like, it's a very, very large image that's scanned. It's in like Stanford's image collections. And somehow the thumbnail is like stuck on my desktop. It won't go away. I can't move it. It's been there for like 4 hours. I'm gonna have to restart my laptop to make it go away.
Or you could just like get used to that being your life now.
Yeah, it's actually really, the funny thing is like it's an image that I specifically got for the IIIF demos, the International Image Interoperability Framework demos that let you do deep zooming. So I was like specifically looking for interesting images that like have lots of detail you can zoom into. So it's kind of funny to have this tiny, tiny, tiny manifestation of this giant image with tons of details in it. But anyways, I don't know that needed to be on the recording, but at least it keeps it entertaining while we're
oh, Liz, where'd you go?
Yeah, so I know that Matt Price for the next couple weeks still is going to be joining us a little bit later just because of his teaching schedule, is one piece of news. And then the other piece of news is while we schedule this for half an hour, hopefully EDJ, so Environmental Data Justice Working Group people from EDGI will be joining us at 5:30. But I invited them to come earlier. I'm just not sure if they'll. Doesn't look like they're making it right now.
So should I plan to stick around past 5:30? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I was planning to stick around for an hour. So, but then Michelle Lee, who some of you know, showed up here at the place where I'm working. So it's like, oh, Michelle, I'm going into a meeting right now.
Michelle can join the meeting.
I think she's going to go walk her dog and then come back in an hour. So
it's the right order of priorities.
Yeah. All right. Am I the moderator for the whole call? All right.
Yeah. And so what we say, but whatever level you're happy with, is you can ask someone to timekeep if you would like them to, or ask usually someone to help take notes.
All right. Maybe people could help with both, especially if there's someone willing to be a note taker while we do this. Oh, thank you, Liz. I should be pretty good at watching time, but if I get like way off, somebody grab me. So the agenda says to start with intros and bullet point updates. So I don't see, have people already added any?
What we've just done, sorry, I feel like this is a good point to how this flow is not super explanatory, is if there's someone new on the call, we would do updates or intros, but because there hasn't been, we just move on and then we just ask if people have any announcements to share.
Okay, great. So nobody's new. Do people have announcements? All right, Eben. You are muted. And Brenda, did you raise your hand too, or were you?
No.
Are you going, Brendan, or am I going? Okay. So I'm going to mispronounce your name, but I helped out at Local Environmental Action, which was a conference in Boston on Saturday with EDGI Lourdes Vera. And so she presented about EDGI and I presented about Data Together to a group of 30 people or so. I have a bunch of, we like brainstormed what people think data is and what they want to see in terms of like a democratic data dream. So I have a bunch of like notes from that. So let me know where we can like put that in. So yeah, it was really interesting.
Great. Does it make sense to add notes to things into the agenda here or into the notes from this?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
I put it, it's just on the page below. I'm not sure where it should go.
Does anyone else have any announcements? All right. Hey, we're ahead of schedule. So, so now we enter the round table section of this meeting. And the focus of this week's roundtable is to talk about what's the actual heading, the topic, RFC decision-making process, and using an RFC decision-making process. But though we only have like 15, 20 minutes to discuss, it's RFC process, and also especially trying to nudge on how do we just decision-making processes in general for this kind of collaboration. Because I actually only know indirectly about how EDGI is governed, and I definitely don't know if people think that governance pattern translates to this collaboration, or if it's well suited or not well suited. So I'm also curious about that. So I would preface the discussion with, there is the easy discussion, which is, do we want to use an RFC style process where anyone can post a request for comments, and there's a set process for those comments to be reviewed, for people to comment on that, and then ultimately it goes to some sort of decision, and the decision is yay or nay on the proposed RFC. That's a pretty standard pattern in the technology world, but that also doesn't answer, even if we like sort that out, it doesn't answer the harder problem of how does that yay or nay get decided, right? Who gets to decide? Is it by sort of direct democracy? Is it by representative democracy? Is it by some sort of oligarchy, right? What are the structures that you use to define when the decision has been made, or who has the authority to make a decision? So I think that like the bulk of while there are details to sort out on whether to use an RFC style process, the actual hard thing is that harder problem. I see Matt Price agreeing also. So in the sense of this roundtable, what would people prefer to talk about? The easy problem or the hard one? Liz?
Well, I'd like us to have a very super brief brainstorm on what would we be trying to achieve with a process like this? For example, would it be trying to understand what problems are worth tackling? Would it be comparing different technical proposals? Who would be doing these things? I think if we could answer that, then I would know, at least personally, how I could respond to both the small and the big questions within RFC.
All right, so should we do like a 5-minute sort of shouting them out, and Liz can type down what people have proposed, and let's avoid digging into the discussion of unpacking them, just only discuss if it's something that needs clarification, so that we all understand what was the item people proposed. So the question we're trying to answer or brainstorm for a list of is, what are the things that would be decided? And I'll also maybe preface it that it's also, maybe we will need separate decision-making processes for different kinds of decisions. But for right now, we'll just brainstorm for what are the kinds of decisions that we might need to make. And we can just go popcorn style, and I will moderate. So if people want to raise their hands, and I'll call out as Matt Price.
Well, I don't know, projects that we want to undertake as Data Together?
Cool. Brendan?
Based on that, what is and is not in scope of the Data Together project? Just kind of the same thing, not totally the same thing.
Organizations joining and leaving, or being asked to leave. Dawn.
Other changes to like maybe if we have an agreement for partnership stuff, or even adopting, just sort of like a set of guidelines.
And related with that, things like code of conduct.
Maybe also technical things. Like I know there's a roadmap and there's been sort of attempts to have conversations around setting direction. So I think there are still some open questions about that platform.
Mm-hmm. And licensing decisions. Anything with legal implications, right? So making decisions about anything where, yeah, that involves a contract or law. Brendan.
And that,
Oh, that,
And then,
yeah,
and then
I'd like.
when we hit that, we're going to have to like roll up to Edgy and roll up to Public Lab.
Mhm. Yeah, there's some like built-in things that have to happen regardless of certain ones.
At least from this side. I mean, probably each partnering org may run into that.
Yep.
And I think to build on that, this question of like who can or should be able to speak with the Data Together voice, like relations to outside, like to stay together, issue press releases if that's the thing. How does that work? Or like, do we do comments on stuff? Is it that kind of organization?
Is there a heading there that's like policies about? I don't know, what's that? What would that be called, Brendan? Like some kind of policies?
I call that PR. It's just like public relations, right? Like,
yeah, and just steering the brand,
Yeah.
and managing the brand, and controlling who can use it.
Jess, you had something.
I was just thinking sort of more generically, like what kinds of data, but I don't know if that's sort of kept in scope with sort of Data Together projects or the kinds of projects that we want to be doing. But are there certain kinds of data that should be off limits in this case? Like, are there boundaries to the kinds of data that Data Together should include?
Mm-hmm. All right, things are slowing down. Are there more? All right, so maybe we've sufficiently brainstormed. So then, are there any clear groupings here that people see?
I think before we even get started, like Liz raised a good point. Like there's some things that just have existing frameworks that need to be obeyed. So I think we could group things that like have to, like certain things that just require all party consent for legal purposes, right?
All right. Any other? Yeah, or maybe let's just call out themes rather than categories. What are themes that people note? Themes or categories or spin-off topics that need to be discussed in order to figure out how to handle these. So there's things where there's legal implications for the participants.
I guess like, I don't know which one of those things this is, but kind of intergroup. So like how we interact with the outside, but then also internal to us, like guidelines.
Yeah. Intra, right? Within.
But then also there's also how we're interfacing as a unit, like how we get to act as a thing that is
So there's like external relations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know that I would call it a theme, but definitely the like who's in, who's out, what's in, what's out, and how is that defined?
Yeah, like boundary definition.
Yeah, I was gonna say boundary work.
Yeah.
Sorry, my pocket is going crazy. I don't know who it is.
Not to be confused with fence line work.
So do those work as?
I think we could all.
Wait, those that from a distance resemble flies. What is that list?
Just quoting Borges.
What is it a reference to?
The Celestial Emporium.
The inefficacy, the intrinsic insufficiency of taxonomic systems, I think.
All right. Okay. So that's a placeholder for the stuff that doesn't fit elsewhere.
Can I add something almost to the above list, which is like our vision? like I don't feel like that's exactly guidelines, but there is something, maybe it's scope but a little bit separate. Like I think we need to do some like generative thing
Yeah.
there.
So mission and vision, is that? All right.
Trying to figure out what category it is, but there's a kind of listening that we'll be doing if we're talking about diversity. We can say diversity of data, but then it's diversity of real world situations, which leads to diversity of people. And it's not all going to be, does X organization want to partner with us? And so, yeah, I guess I've been assuming that if we're going to try to backbone a movement that would call itself Data Together, there would be like a facilitated listening, like an open consultation mode that is maybe a little bit broader than like strictly governance. Not sure where to put that because most of the ideas that have come up above are really like things that like organizations who are capable of partnering like would be capable of like having organized discussions on, if that makes any sense.
I'm trying to ponder a bunch of, like, it seems like the things that we've listed here are all things where we need to have clarity about who has the authority to do that thing or make the call, where you don't necessarily need authority in order to listen and facilitate listening and to gather information and to lift up voices. So I'm wondering, what is it that, so is there in that frame, is that why it's hard to figure out how to fit it into this list? That it's not necessarily something you need permission to do? It's more about responsibility, maybe?
I mean, we should handle that carefully because we're talking about the most sensitive part of our work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think referring to that is like that which does not need permission is it's slippery when doing community work.
What do you mean by that?
Implying that the listening and the raising up of voices is that which requires the least authority and governance makes it sound like a site of carelessness, and we wouldn't want to leave that uncared for.
So is it, maybe the way I could word it, are you flagging that it's something that we have to acknowledge as a set of responsibilities and activities that a core group is responsible for? So it's not necessarily something anyone needs permission to do, but it is something that this group is responsible for doing.
That's getting closer, yeah.
Does anyone else have thoughts?
I think, sorry, can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think part of where that sort of seems to stem from, at least thinking about the way that Edgy has approached this through a very process, like a lot of care has been given to process and understanding how we go about, like, I'm not surprised that this project has sort of evolved into a lot of conversations about process as a method of making sure that decisions are, even if the outcome's the same, the decision is made for the right reasons. And I think what I'm hearing when Liz says, like, as a site of carelessness is like, if you leave things as sort of a de facto set of decisions, or like sort of don't articulate the necessity of going through a certain procedure, it can bias toward certain defaults, if to use technical language. And I think that is part of the interest in sort of elevating listening and elevating a process of engaging is to sort of guard against doing things as a sort of compounding of default decisions that maybe arise out of like convenience or time pressure or some other sort of like preceding need. And so correct me if that's wrong, Liz, but I think the energy is like the decisions start a thing that I see a lot at Edgy is like we start farther up the chain before moving towards sort of a decision, and that tends to make the decision-making process a little more rapid when it finally happens. It's a lot of like, okay, entertain possibilities, develop thoughts, and then sort of it moves quicker. Is that fair? I mean, that's my, I don't think that's, to be honest, I haven't had a ton of time with the Edgy process, so I'd be more than welcome to have criticism or refinement on that.
So I'm looking at the clock. The things that we listed in this brainstorming definitely seem like things that, a lot of them are things that we need to find a consensus about who has the authority to do these things. And if we don't, we will hit points where we're blocked and we are either unable to make a decision as a group, or decisions end up being made with like utter lack of process or complete like process fail. Where the discussion that Liz is raising to me sounds more like getting into the details of the process and flagging how we do it is important. And so we have to incorporate there. Does that make sense? Or am I off?
No, I think that was good. I think my questions really go to what Don said about vision. Is this careful group of science and technology scholars, community organizers, technologists, visionaries, like, are we here to spread a message about the decentralized web, or are we here to take care of sites of injustice regarding data and be part of a coalition, in part spreading the message of the decentralized web? I can type notes.
Okay, I was trying to capture what you were saying as you're talking. I think that's a very important discussion for us to have. The most important thing is for us to figure out who gets to make that decision, and how are we going to know whether we've made a decision. And in making that particular decision about mission and vision, whoever gets to make that decision will have to grapple with this question. So it's 5:24. So I think what we have time for is identifying next steps. Is that we've identified that there's these sort of categories, there are these types of decisions that need to be made. We've identified some groupings of those, and we've identified particularly that there's this overarching question about, which speaks to the mission and how we interpret that mission. So I would be happy to lead another roundtable or multiple more roundtables that are sort of framed around nudging this through a funnel from this open-ended brainstorm towards like having a clarity about structure. Do people have ideas about what we could do next, or what the steps might be between now and having done?
Yeah, so next week was our second quarterly meeting. And we had sort of given ourselves an hour and a half for that as well, so another 90 minutes. I do feel like there would need to be something more roundtable-y, which could start that, which is an immediate picking up from here. I think I understand your point, Matt, which makes sense to me, at some of it being starting from understanding who's authority to like help that first decision to like kind of like get enough traction to get the wheels spinning. And that feels like the next step, but I could be missing something.
So could you restate what would the next step be?
Use the first 30 minutes of next week's meeting to have like a round table to focus on the decision the sort of scope that you outlined, which was the process to make the first decision and who has to be involved in it about like mission value stuff. I don't think we would like then define those in that session because that would take, I'm assuming, a while.
Oh, so we could even frame it more, even narrower. Given the organizations that are engaged and the parties that are involved, it's not actually that many people. Who do we need involved in a conversation in order to generate something that we say, yes, this is, who do we need and what steps do we need involved in order to have clarity on this is the mission and this is our proposal about what the decision-making structure should be. And so we can basically form a working group that can come back with a solid proposal. And we could use that 30 minutes to figure out what that working group looks like and what their assignment is. Matt?
I kind of like that. It does seem to me that there are this bootstrapping problem has two pieces. It's who and how, right? So like we have neither a sense of like what the cohort is that constitutes quorum or whatever, nor a sense of what process they use to arrive at a decision. And I agree that we need both of those in order to make any decisions. I think it will be nice to have that figured out, and then we can start moving forward on some things.
So would we be able to say we use that 30 minutes to define who and how will specifically define the mission and a proposal for the decision-making process? And like start from that. So it's like very specifically scoped. They're important decisions, but like we can just decide on that. Maybe 30 minutes will be enough to define a who and how, and then those who's can follow the how.
I like it.
Anyone have any ideas of other next steps in the next 2 minutes that we could collect?
Just to make sure I understand, I thought also we were going to look at a demo of an RFC process next week. Would we no longer do that?
I'd be happy to show. I could even make a demo based on, maybe it's easy. I'd certainly be happy to show the IPFS one so people could see how it works. We could even make one for Data Together with like sample RFCs.
And I'll just say, even though we're not doing that anymore today, to me, the issue around the RFCs is, is it too heavy a process for who we are? And if so, is there some streamlining or something that we could do to make sure it doesn't just prove an interruption rather than a help?
My concerns about RFC is that it spent 1,000+ words describing how a proposal should be written, in what format, and posted where. And then in one line, it says the community will achieve consensus. So I almost don't even, I see it as like a request for documentation, but really not a decision-making structure. And to be so heavy on the written, I mean, obviously all of us here on this call can write, but in my broader work, to require so much written documentation in like a format that's more detailed than a college application is very exclusive.
So what's the, we're at 5:30, but I am curious, what's the right framing for having that discussion? Like, so we use this roundtable period to talk about what are the types of decisions and the part that's the one-liner, right? And then the community will reach consensus. And we're like, I agree, that's the hard part. But then there is this other discussion of, are RFCs the right decision, just the right process, and what are the strengths and weaknesses there? Should we just have a roundtable where it's specifically on that? I'd be happy to do that. That's what we had scheduled for this one, and then I realized like that's actually the smaller issue. So we could just do another roundtable that's specifically on that type of process, and then pick it apart.
So perhaps because the task to be done, this initial task, is actually a writing assignment. EDGI has detailed consensus-based writing guidelines, the best I've seen.
All right.
So without demoing those as well, I think we'd be missing something.
I would love to get those. Should we do those? Should we do that as a roundtable format, where we demo each? Is that the right way to hash through them? Awesome. Could we fit those both into one roundtable? All right.
Well, I would say maybe, because that feels like the next step in this process, could we do that in the meeting that's coming up next week? Like both the sort of two, you sort of scoped out two roundtables. Could we just do them back to back?
I'd be fine with it.
Okay.
Any
Awesome.
opposition? All right. Did we write down that anywhere, that that's what we agreed on? I've been focusing on the discussion and not the writing.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So those are our two. That's our first 30 minutes and our second 30 minutes. All right. For next week's call.
I'm excited.
And before we wrap this up, next week's call, it's at this time, or it's Thursday, 6 to 7 Eastern time. Is that right?
No, it's
No.
this time.
It's this time.
5 to 6:30, correct?
Oh, Data Together Coordinating, Monday the 12th. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, 5 to 6:30.
Great. All right, then that sounds great. So this next one, do we continue recording? Do we? Oh wait, I'm not recording right now.
No, I was gonna turn
I'm
it
off the
on
hook.
and then have us move over into the EDJ and Data Together chat. Okay, so
I'm recording.